So time is short and so on, so I just wanted to play you a little video, right? Because I'm not that good of a speaker. Just yeah, poor guy, right? What do we do to our users? Do they deserve this sort of thing, treatment? So the topic is psychology of performance. So basically, this kind of kicks in after we've done all the basics, right? We gzip, we minify, and everything, and then we'll probably run out of things to do, what to improve, and how we can make the page actually feel faster, although it isn't. So to start off, just a little example about the human perceptions and how inaccurate they are. So in this image, you see the A and B squares, and A is black and B is white. That's what it looks like. But actually, they're all the same color. They're the same shade of gray, but you can never tell that, right? Unless, see my math PowerPoint skills, you hide everything else, and then you see that they're actually the exact same shade of gray. So interesting thing is, if you go back, although you were just convinced intellectually that they're the same colors, looking back at the image, can you tell that they're the same colors, or that's still black and white, right? So if we cannot tell black from white, what are the chances of us getting anything right? Another example, gradients. All right, one gradient on top of another. We hide everything else. Again, solid gray, no gradients here. And colors too, right? So you see that brown square at the top and this orange in the middle, right? This one here and this one there. They're actually the same color. And when you hide everything, you see they're actually both brown, right? So that's kind of depressing, right? I mean, we have a huge part of our brain dedicated to seeing things, and that's the thing that we do the most daily. We look at things, and if we cannot trust our most developed sense, then can we really trust anything else, like durations, for example? So talking about page performance, we're interested in the duration, right, not at the actual time, clock time. So we want to manage how people perceive that the page is getting loaded. So we have the actual duration, time to unload or unload to unload. And, but then there's expected duration. So people come with some sort of preconceptions of how long something should take. So they have certain expectations. And what they actually perceive is something different, right? It might be more, might be less, but it's definitely not the same. And then there's the remember time, because there's the act of storing that duration information and then retrieving it later to tell our friends or family, you know, this site was fast, this was slow. The remember duration is also something different. So there's been a lot of experiments in how people tell or really cannot tell time over the years. So this is one experiment in the UCLA. So they have people sitting in silence, and somebody rings a bell every 53 seconds. Why 53, I don't know. And then people are asked, how long did you think it took between the two bell rings? And the average answer is 67 seconds. And, but people on stimulants, right, they will perceive that as being even slower, and they say, oh, I think it took 91 seconds on average. Then depending on the age, you might perceive time differently. That's an old saying, right? When you're slow, when you're old, time moves faster. And there's experiments to prove. So also, depending on where you live, there was this interesting research. Basically, the researchers counted how many people wear watches in different cities, how long do they, how fast they can walk a certain length in downtown areas, and that kind of thing, how quick they talk. And there was a big difference, right? People in New York live kind of a faster, sort of fast-paced life, right? They walk faster, everything faster. When you get to the Midwest, then things get some slower, and the slowest is in California, in LA. Actually, in LA, they had troubles finding enough people walking on the streets, right, to do the measurement. And it's the same across countries and so on. So when you live in an industrialized city, then the pace of life is faster. But it also depends on where exactly. And they did another example, another test, basically saying how are you willing to help others, like maybe a blind man crossing the street. And not surprisingly, in the fast-paced cities, people are not that helpful. In slower cities, they will take the time to help other people, and except for LA, where people are slow and uncooperative, which is an exception. So it depends on the culture, it depends on the climate. In some countries, when the invitation is, you have a dinner invitation at 6, you're supposed to arrive at 6 exactly. Some others, when you show up at 6, you find a host in their bathrobe, and no one expects you to be there until 7 or 8. So it depends on the time of the day, the day of the week, body temperature, all kinds of factors. So in general, all things being equal, the clock is usually faster. That means it moves faster than what people think. And the long durations are harder to judge. So you would think that we don't know anything about the clock. It's kind of a human invention, right? And why 24 hours? Why 60 seconds? That doesn't make any sense, right? But you would think that things like the day, the 24 hours day, like the sun and the rotation of the earth and so on, will have something in us, but it's actually not the case. And the longer the time, then yeah, sure. Mark can get a handheld.
Sorry about that. Try that and speak loudly.
Excellent, thanks. Can you turn the clock, because I don't know how much time is left. Thanks. All right. Okay, and people report instances when they feel that the time stops, right? When you're doing really deep into a sport, or like tennis players and baseball players or martial arts, people are in so much control that they think they see everything in kind of a slow motion, as if the time stops, and they have all the time in the world to decide what to do. So that's also kind of an extreme example of time perception. So like I said, the remember time is something different, and it turns out it depends on your emotional state. So if something is painful, it's going to feel slower, right? So there was this example. People are shown a video of a car accident, and when they asked them how fast were the cars driving when they hit each other, on average people say 24 miles per hour. But when they're asked how fast were the cars driving when they smashed each other, so being more unpleasant, then they judge it that the cars were actually faster. Another example, people observing a fake assault on college campus, which lasts 34 seconds. When they're asked later how long was this unpleasant event, they judge about 81 seconds, or they were off by quite a bit. And another example, people watching a bank robbery for 30 seconds, and 2 days later they're asked, okay, how much do you think it took? So people are then as much as 50% off. And there's actually a difference between men and women. So we talked about visual illusions. There's also temporal illusions, right? There's this thing called a kappa effect. So when you're on a journey and you travel for 1 hour and then travel for another hour a little bit faster, but because you took more distance, then people think that the second part was actually slower because you saw a lot more things. And in general, the time feels slower when, like I said, something is unpleasant, when something is unknown, right? You don't know what to expect, and then you're kind of more alert, and you try to make sense of all the environment and so on. And that's how you perceive things as slower. When something is boring, definitely, and when there's too much things to keep track of, right? That's why people say don't put too many bullet slides, because it looks busy and it looks boring, right? Another interesting study of computer frustrations, people asked some companies to keep a log by themselves on paper whenever they feel frustrated, and to explain why. So I actually didn't put that on the slides, but it was actually pretty interesting that the web browsing caused 122 frustrations, way ahead of the second one, which is email, 50, and operating system, 30. So people are much more frustrated in their web browsing. And when they say, okay, what exactly in the web browsing? So most frustrations were timed out, dropped, refused connections, long download time, 404s, page not found, and way at the bottom, with only 13 frustrations, pop-up ads. So, I mean, we all hate pop-up ads, right? That's the most annoying thing, but actually it turns out that for most people, even more annoying is to make them wait. And they figure out that naturally when you're frustrated, that affects your communications with the team. You start yelling at people, and then so on. It's not pleasant. So, right, you're frustrated, you're irritated, you're more stressed. There's also some physiological effects on that. Like, I always subscribe to the idea that, I mean, on the web, we don't launch rockets, or it's not like a hospital software or anything, and no one's going to die if we do something bad, right? But actually, it might not be so true, right? So when time feels faster, when task is successful, some experiments shown that you judge one side as being faster, although it was slower, but only because you were able to complete your purchase, airline booking, and whatnot. When the system responds, right, it doesn't, just hang there. When you see some progress going on, and when you're informed, when you know in advance what to expect. So there's this law of service. Think about fast food service, right? So people judge the quality of service based on this simple equation: what they perceived and what they expected. So how to manage those expectations, right? Because people will come to the site with certain expectations, right? There's not always something you can do about it. But if you provide feedback and you warn people when you have a long-running operation or anything, say, okay, this will take a while. So yeah, we should mention the theory of the flow by this psychologist. So he was basically trying to figure out what makes people happy, and studying mostly jazz musicians, artists, and so on, and came up with this idea that there's this state of flow, where people have this, lose the track, lose the sense of time, time distorts, it's not, you feel in control, you're up to a challenge, up to a task, and you're learning through failure, right? How often do you read the manual? Never, right? You want to experiment, you want to click here and there, go back, and just, and what he found out is also that the doing is actually the reward. So people in this state of flow are not so much worried about the outcome of the task, but as long as they enjoy what they're doing, they are able to maintain that state of flow. Okay, because we're about numbers, so there's this research saying, you've probably seen it, popularized by Jacob Nielsen, that 0.1 seconds people perceive that as instantaneous. 1 second is where you keep your flow, and after 10 seconds you just lose attention and you move on to other things. So there's this wonderful book that I highly recommend by a researcher from Microsoft, Designing in Engineering Time. So he came up with a framework, kind of not so rigid, right, for how to judge what people perceive. So what he says is from 100 to 200 milliseconds, that's perceived as instantaneous. So the example he gives is a flip of a switch, right? You turn on the switch and the light goes on, so there's no waiting. For between half a second and a second, that's the immediate time. So it's like you perceive that there's a bit of lag, right? But you're okay, you don't need any progress indication or anything, you just, that's fine. So 2 to 5 seconds, the state of flow, and 7 to 10 is that captivity phase, where that's basically the maximum that you need to, you're willing to wait. So after 10 seconds, you should allow the people to leave and come back later, or send them an email when something is complete or something like that. So he gives an example with the human conversation, right? When you ask somebody, hey, Philip, and he replies usually within a second. When he doesn't, then it feels odd, right? It feels like, what he's doing. And that's also in the conversation. When you talk to somebody, and it's okay for them to take their time about the response and so on, but they'll give you a progress indication in the form of, that kind of thing, which is what no public speaker should do, they say, right? But everybody does it, all right? It just gives you, people feel that they have to give you feedback, right? So another number, response time. So this is basically just looking at something red, and when it turns green, you click a button. So that's, the average is 190 milliseconds. And gets slower when you have to choose between two options, and even slower when you have much more options. And they figured out there's actually some correlation to the IQ, depending on how fast you react. So in Yahoo search, we use that metric called the blink of an eye, right? It would be excellent to render a page in a blink of an eye. So how long is that? That turns out on average, it's 300 to 400 milliseconds. It's almost really hard to render a page in this time frame, but if you can provide some feedback in a blink of an eye, right, partial page or something, that'll be excellent. So in this morning, in the Google keynote, they mentioned about turning the page, that the web should feel like you're turning the page. So I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I was trying to figure out how long does it take to turn one page. I couldn't find any data, so I did a Father's Day experiment with my kids. So well, just let me ask you, how many of you do you think it's turning one page of a book will take under 100 milliseconds? Nobody? 500 milliseconds? Okay, 1 second? 2 seconds? 3? Nice. So yeah, this is a very limited experiment, right? Just me and 2 kids. So Kid A was able to turn 31 pages in a minute. The second attempt was 27, and I turned a little bit more. So somewhere between 1.3 seconds and 2 seconds. So I think that's a good time frame for a page to render, right? To complete the onload and everything. But there's got to be some progress in between, right? No one's going to wait for that. So imagine if you're turning the page and it's all white, and as soon as you're finished, then all the content all of a sudden pops up. That'll be weird, right? Okay, it's just something useful to try to give you at the end. So what to do? Okay, people cannot tell time, but how can we help them? So the first thing, Annie Sullivan from Yahoo had a nice talk about progressive rendering. I just wanted to mention the first byte flash. And this is how the Google search page is being rendered. So as soon as they get the response, they'll flash the first chunk, which is only the header. All right, there's only the search query, right? There's no actual work being done. It's they have everything that they need to know about this thing. So they'll flash that as soon as possible. Then they'll do a second flash with all the search results. And the third chunk will be the JavaScript where it progressively enhances the page and so on. So right here, maybe if you can render that first chunk and have it something actually visible for the user, they'll feel much more confident and perceive the whole thing as faster. The second chunk, in this case, is giving you something usable, and the third chunk is enhancing it later. So what is the worst enemy of the progressive enhancement? CSS. Nicole will talk about that tomorrow. But just to give you an example, so this is a waterfall of a page that does the first byte flash, and the green line here is the time that something was rendered. So that's nice. So there's another example where that time is, although they both take the same time, but then the first initial rendering is later, and that is because there's a CSS file here, and the CSS will block the rendering. So that's why it's important to keep the CSS sizes really small, and in the previous case, even inline. And another thing, if you don't use a CDN or something, but you still split files between different domains, then maybe a good idea for the CSS to sit on the same domain as the page, because the DNS is resolved and you'll be able to get out faster. Progress indication, we have to inform people that there is some progress going on. And people are good to judge, to take hints and judge how the progress is going on. So we'll look at the status bar, we'll look at sometimes at the page title, right? The page is blank, but we see the page title, so yeah, maybe there's something going on there. And what we really don't like to see is those progress indications, the rainbow wheel on the Mac and that hourglass. And I would add here that Ajax loading thing, right? Because I think it's abused, right? People just, because it's common thinking that you have to give some sort of progress, right? But when you know that something is going to be short enough, right? Maybe you don't need that progress. If something is instantaneous, up to 1 second, then that's probably not needed. And then when you move to the next level, if nothing happens, right, then you might start showing some progress, and then show even more progress indications, say what's going on. But just showing that GIF animation all the time, I don't think it's a good idea. And honestly, because we're as developers, we tend to use some tools only because we can, right? So sometimes, although the interaction doesn't ask for any Ajax, XHR stuff, we'll do it because we can. So there's often bad examples of using Ajax, and anytime I see this kind of a progress indication, I'm a little bit nervous because things might go wrong. Where if you see the whole page rendering, that's good. Sometimes you might have too many indications, right? So this was a screenshot I took at the post office. I was just trying to find the guy's postal address, and everything was pretty slow on the edge network. So there's one indicator here, another one here, another one here. So nothing happens. I have a whole bunch of indication that nothing's going on, and it's really frustrating. What to look here? I scratched out the domain name, so you don't know who's that. Okay, so yeah, the progress is generally good, right? If people see progress, they feel more comfortable. And I just want to mention that I've worked on a project where people are trying to do a flicker-free rendering. That means don't render anything until everything is ready, right? Because it's sort of a port from a desktop system where there's no progressive loading of images and stuff. So they thought it was ugly for people to see how things came up on the page. So they used frame swapping right? When you click on a link, the next page loads in a hidden frame, and as soon as unload fires, those frames are swapped. So you navigate between two frames all the time, which is, and all of the time, most of the time you're just staring and something says, please wait, right? Which is not pleasant. Like I said, when something is expected to be immediate, then maybe you don't need that indicator. Just to mention the lazy drop-downs, right? I'm also a big believer that we shouldn't load anything on the page that we have no use for and that people are unlikely to click, right? So when you have some drop-downs that might never be used, people sometimes will not load those on the page, but then with the drop-downs, people have expectations, right, for this thing to be, you're used to when you click on a drop-down, it should come up right away. So doing this and even showing something, say, okay, loading your options or something like this, that doesn't look good. Indicating progress, yeah, sometimes you might give too much information. And when you said when there's too much going on, people perceive that as being slower. So the research shows that you can read, on average, people read in English 4 to 5 words a second. So if that progress indication takes a second, then you shouldn't put paragraphs of text. And there's also the technique of kind of a progressive disclosure, right? If you just give a little bit of information and then allow people to click or something for more information, if it gets even slower, or sometimes depending on the level of the users, what people can really do with that information, right? If it's a database administrator or something, they might use more information than if it's just somebody who doesn't care about requests and responses and so on. And also the wording, right? Because we know time is money, right? It's kind of a weird equation because as we saw, time is really flexible and not an absolute thing. But people are really protective of their time, and they don't like to wait, right? So when you slap a message that says "please wait," you're kind of interrupting with the person's flow and say, "Okay, I'm this system, and I'll tell you to wait right here, right?" Or stand by. You feel kind of you're not in control, right? Somebody's telling you to wait, and that's not nice. So you can opt in for saying saving or loading or something. You just give a one word of exactly what's going on. Not exactly, but an idea. Another thing is to prefetch components, right? So that you know in advance that somebody's going to go to that page, and then you can start loading some stuff in the background. So then it feels faster when they arrive. Like a good example is the login screen. When people are typing, then you can preload in the background. Favicon is if you don't know what exactly is going to be needed and you're going to another domain, you can always fetch the favicon. That means you resolve the DNS and you have that favicon component. So to keep people in the flow and not interrupted, that's something to consider definitely. So there's this all those idiot boxes saying, okay, are you sure? Are you really sure? So people don't like to see that because you click and you expect something to happen, but then you're given with a prompt. Then you have to read it and react. You lose at least 200 milliseconds to react and another second to read, and that might interrupt your flow. So for the state of flow, it's nice for the people to be able to experiment. So that's why we should never break the back button. We should provide people with undo options so that they're free to experiment and always be certain that they can come back and to what they did. The uncertainty is bad. Like we said, when you're not certain, when something is unfamiliar, you perceive that as a slower event. There's actually a study with bank lines. So when you're told that it's going to take a certain amount of minutes, then you're actually happier after that. Even doesn't matter how long exactly it took, but you usually perceive it as it took less because you were informed and you were prepared to wait a bit. And yeah, keep the system responsive to commands, right? Because in that stage, you just want. I mean, you cannot force anyone to be in the flow, but we just have to make something to at least not interrupt it. So when you click a button, you don't expect it to, to freeze or anything. Right? So just to keep the interface responsive. So yeah, intuitions lie. We all have certain intuitions, and we feel that something is going to be better, but very often we're not right, and people have all kinds of different expectations. So you shouldn't trust experts, and the best thing to do is just to experiment, right? Do tests, because sometimes people have what it looks to us unreasonable expectations. So yeah, that was the example with the Google homepage when people were sitting there waiting. So what are you waiting for? Well, we're waiting for the rest to load, right? So the same thing happened when Yahoo redesigned the search.yahoo.com page. It's really blank, and so they reported that people were filing bugs and saying, okay, something is broken. And paging, right? So you would think that paging, when you click on the next page, there's another request. So it's going to take the time and so on. But for people, what they did was, let's say in this example, I searched for unicorns, and this search engine did all this extra hard work and figured out that there's actually 30 million results for that. So that was really hard work. And from there on, people expect that the results are already there, everything's retrieved. So just switching to another page should be instantaneous, right? Because the results are there, and they're all figured out. Yeah, like I said, yeah, about the users. If you're not that's why sometimes some startups are successful when they do products that they actually use, but most often than not, we're not the users of our systems, or there's a lot of different users of the system, so don't trust your instincts. So the colors, and that's what Marissa from Google mentioned last year, Velocity, that they, when they did the Google Reader, a bit of redesign and tweaking, so the list, the options of the blocks you want to read were on a sort of a blue background. So the only change was they changed this to white, and they asked people what they think, and they say, oh, this is faster. Definitely the white thing was being perceived as faster because, right, it's less busy. And but also that white comes with expectations, right? Sometimes people, when they see a white page, right, they will expect it to be faster, right? So if you're white, then you better be fast, right? Because it's easy to do a nice, clean, minimalistic layout, and then at the same time load 2 megabytes of fonts and jQuery and prototype. So about remember durations, right? There's sometimes you may negate the negative effect. So if you had a long duration, and then you can, let's say you search on a travel website, you search for, so it took a while to search for hotels and flights. And at the end, if they highlight the benefits and say, okay, you got the best prices or whatever, then people will be happier, and they say, actually, it wasn't so slow, right? So yeah, what's in it for me? That's what the users care about, right? Sometimes, to help the people remember that something was faster than actually it is, you can report the time. That's not always an option, but I found it interesting looking at the Google search results page. They report this 0.15 seconds, how long it took. To me, that doesn't carry any information, right? To me, it's probably just some debugging information that they put initially and they decided to keep later on. Because for most people, 0.15 seconds, what is that? Is it a second and a half, or was it a split second? And when you go 0.09 seconds, what is that? People have no use for that information. But in this case, I wonder if just by the virtue of seeing that something took some ridiculously small amount of time, then you say, okay, this thing is really fast. I got all my results in no time, although the actual page might take a second or 2 seconds. For the long-running tasks, using web workers who are available, set timeout so that you know that the interface is responsive. And if something takes more than the captive zone of 10 seconds, then you should allow them to either stop this or say, okay, leave your email, we'll send you an email when something is done. And often it's not a good idea to report how much time has passed, because it's just a painful recollection. Oh, I've been sitting there for 2 minutes or so. But it's easy to report how much time, it's harder to report how much time you expect to take. But the first time experience, right? Because like you said, when something is unfamiliar, you perceive it as slow. So that's why, again, it's really important to optimize the empty cache experience because people might not come back to experience the full cache. Can you go too fast? Yeah, with the edit in place, people are surprised when when something happens too fast. So that's why the 37 signals, they come up with this animating the yellow color so that they give some indication that it's actually saved. You don't have to wait anymore. Yeah, I have time, but that's the last thing that I wanted to mention is the distractimations on the use of animations. So sometimes you don't know, you don't want to load all the content in advance, but you have a pretty good confidence that, that you can load it faster. So the left is the Google search. So when you click to expand search tools, it actually makes an AJAX request to get all the options, but it doesn't give you any progress indication. It doesn't say loading, there's no spinning, anything. It's just animating. So, and by the time the animation is finished, this content arrives here. And the same on the Yahoo homepage. And there's all those articles at the beginning. So when you click here to go to the next set of images here and articles, then there's an animation. Although the content is not there, the animation starts and it gives you the feeling that it's actually responsive. Yeah, you can go bad with animations, right, and have them too slow and too painful. And my time is up. And yeah, that's all I had. So this is a book I'm writing, and that's a bad example of using animation, right, because it takes too long, right, and it's too painful, and oh, come on already. Yeah, so thank you very much for your time. We can speak outside, but yeah.